You're listening to Big World Network.
Just Kill Me, Season 2, Episode 7, Freya's File. Written by Wendy Herman. Read by Wendy Herman. I left the hospital exhausted, emotionally and otherwise. Trevor had come to take Freya home, and the last thing I wanted was to feel like a third wheel. I was too tired to think about all that had happened. I walked into my apartment and tossed my keys, missing the bowl on the small hallway table, and watching the keys get some air before crashing to the floor. I sighed. I'll get those later. I took my jacket off and threw it on the back of the couch as I entered the living room. Janice had been there that morning, so the place was clean, but I wasn't much of a neat freak. I only hired the cleaning lady after Freya had stopped by, and commented that the place smelled too much like bachelor. I dropped onto the couch and stared at the envelope I had taken from Pixley's desk. Freya's super top-secret file, that the director had practically handed to me himself, was pulsing in my hands. The small part of my brain that was still functioning knew, somewhere deep down, that the pulsing was actually my body throbbing from extreme fatigue, but it still seemed like the envelope had a life of its own. The secrets inside were practically screaming to get out. I was so spent from the day I'd had, and from fearing for Freya's life, I didn't know if I had the energy to open it. But I was positive sleep would not be possible until I knew what was in that mystery file. It may hold the answers to the strange flashback Freya and I had simultaneously experienced. I took a deep breath and slowly broke the seal. I pulled out the 2-inch stack of papers and laid it on the glass-top coffee table. I put my elbows on my knees and ran both hands through my hair, then leaned back for a few seconds, staring at the pile. I wondered if I would regret what I was about to do. What if the woman I loved and thought I knew was, well, someone else? The curiosity was too much. I had to know. I reached for the top sheet when I realized something. If I was going to figure out what Freya had been through, I needed to start from the beginning. I picked up the whole pile and flipped it upside down. The very first paper, the oldest one in Freya's file, was an assignment order. It looked just like the one I had signed when I joined the FBI all those years ago, right before Freya had started dating Trevor. Suddenly my head started to pound, and the words on the page became blurred. I had a flash of a memory and grabbed my head with both hands, trying to hold it in. Freya and I were in my car, a shiny red 2-door Grand Am, and she was laughing at something I'd just said. She looked so beautiful that I couldn't take my eyes off her. She was wearing a brown dress that hit her every curve just right, and had her hair pulled back in a low ponytail so I could see her sexy neck. She scolded me, smiling, and pushed my face away so I would watch the road. She had always been the sensible one. I laughed and turned my attention back to the road. We were driving down a busy street at night, a city street that could have been anywhere. New York City, Chicago, L.A., Minneapolis? There was nothing from my vantage point to suggest exactly where we were, but the young me knew where he was going, it seemed. Everything was right with the world. Then Freya shouted at me and my smile disappeared. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw a black car with blacked-out windows approaching fast. It had European plates. "How the hell did they find us so fast?" Freya asked me. Then she hiked up her dress and retrieved a gun from a concealed holster on her hip. She leaned out the window and started shooting. I opened my eyes and the lights in my apartment flickered. I was still sitting on my couch, leaning back against the cushion. I blinked a few times as the throbbing in my temples ceased. What the hell was that? I rubbed my temples and sat forward again. It took a moment for my eyes to focus. Then I picked up the form that had signed Freya's life into the FBI over 20 years ago. But that didn't make sense. It was dated March 22nd, 1991, when Freya was just a sophomore in college. Maybe it was just a typo, but Even if I could write it off as an error, I couldn't ignore the fact that she hadn't even applied to the FBI until a year later, and then she'd been rejected. I remembered her disappointment when she'd received the letter. It was some shit about how there were no field openings that would fit her particular skills, etc., etc. I had told her it was a bunch of crap and that it was their loss. She seemed to recover pretty quickly and started talking excitedly about pursuing her second choice of joining the Air Force, and her spirits had lifted considerably by that evening when I had taken her to see the newest Indiana Jones movie. That would be the one with Sean Connery, not the one with aliens. It had been out for a few years, but if you didn't mind waiting a while, the campus would eventually show new movies for free, and well, college students are poor, so we usually waited. After the movie, we had gone back to her little apartment, which was practically our little apartment for as much time as I spent there too, and we'd had an incredible night together. As she fell asleep in my arms, I had thought that my life couldn't possibly get any better. A shiver ran down my spine as I remembered, and my groin throbbed. Down, boy. I needed to concentrate. I went back to the paper and scrutinized every line on the page. March 22nd, 1991. I just couldn't convince myself that it was a simple error. My suspicious nature wouldn't let me. But if the date was correct, then what the hell did it mean? We had started dating in the fall of 1990, after pretending our mutual feelings for each other were strictly platonic for the first year. We had met in August of 1989, when we were both freshmen, but at 23, I was older than most of the seniors and hadn't made many friends, until I met Freya, who was barely, she had to have been 17, in the small Forensic Science 101 class. But wait, she wasn't only 17 when I met her, was she? The date started to swim around in my head. That would have made her only 16 when she graduated high school. That didn't sound right. It was a long time ago, but I'd always been good at remembering dates. I was sure we had met in August of 1989. I was, however, certain of the memory of my first impression of her. She was a beautiful young girl, which was the first thing I noticed, of course. But after talking to her for only a few minutes, I was surprised at how quickly we connected. It was immediately clear how smart she was, and I could tell she had what some call an old soul. I was hooked after 5 minutes. It was love at first conversation. I smiled at the memory of our first encounter. Then I frowned. I had to focus. I took a deep breath and closed my eyes, hoping that would help me sort out all the dates. She had applied to the FBI in November of 1991. I was sure of that. It was our third but last year of college. She had taken classes every summer and a more than full load during the regular semesters to graduate in 3 years, and had convinced me to do the same, although my grades couldn't compare to hers. The combination of her intelligence, her drive, and her ADD, although there wasn't a name for it back then, made her a force to be reckoned with. I was convinced even then that she could do anything. Which is why it was a shock when she received the rejection letter in February 1992. The rejection letter. I quickly flipped through the pile and couldn't find anything that resembled the letter I remembered. Strange. I went back to the form in my hand, wondering what other mysteries I would find. Realistically, incorrect dates didn't really tell me anything, other than whoever filled out the form might have been a complete idiot. Wrong dates were put on forms all the time, I had to remind myself. The rest was all pretty normal, from what I remembered on my own initial assignment form. But wait, another incorrect date. This time it was Freya's birth date. The day was correct, July 1st, but the year was wrong. It said 1971, but she was born in 1972. Wasn't she? Suddenly, I didn't know for sure. All the dates were now doing battle in my head. It was like the WWE in there. I was starting to think the form had been typed up by a moron, plain and simple. But the director back then, Baron Shields, had signed it, big and bold at the bottom, and he had been known for his attention to detail. He was the director who had ordered all FBI forms to be redone, made more efficient with less redundancy. Why would he sign a form with so many errors? Then I noticed one final oddity. The signature block where Freya's smooth classic script should have been was blank. She'd never signed her own enlistment form into the FBI. So was she in the FBI or wasn't she? I mean, I knew she was now, and she'd signed the same form just a few weeks ago, albeit an updated version. But 21 years ago... A sharp pain tore through my head, and I closed my eyes for a moment. I set the form down on the table and reached for the next one in the stack. As I tried to pick up one sheet, several came with it, all connected by perforations that had never been broken. Irritated and tired beyond belief, I pulled and pulled until the last connected sheet came up. I laid the 6-page spread flat on the table, shoving the rest of the file back to make room. It was a medical scan of some sort. As I tried to make my eyes focus, I read the top. Above the computer-digitized waves that spanned all 6 pages, it said, Freya Tamar McKenna, her maiden name. And below that it said, Initial CAT scan of proposed subject, Project RVW-19710701. It was dated 5 April 91. The next item on the pile was another CAT scan, this one dated a month later, 2 May 91, entitled Post-Implant CAT Scan of Proposed Subject. This one had a handwritten note at the bottom that said, Implant successful, subject ready for reinsertion and test. Then I noticed something and pulled the first scan out to double-check. In the top right-hand corner of both scans was a stamp, faded but legible. It was a company signature, Winkle Labs. That sounded vaguely familiar to me. I rubbed my temples and closed my eyes, navigating through my memories to find this one specific clue. Winkle Labs, Winkle Labs, Winkle. Freya and I had done an experimental study in college for a little extra money. The pharmaceutical company that sponsored it was Winkle Labs. I remembered because Winkle seemed to use unwitting college students for a lot of its studies back then, and it was a funny name. I couldn't remember when, though. Was it April? Then it all came flooding back to me. The study was during our spring break. I remember we laughed at how romantic our break was going to be, volunteering to be lab rats for the week. The exact dates eluded me, but it could have been April. Why the hell was a CAT scan, no, 2 CAT scans, from a standard drug study using college students as guinea pigs in an official FBI file for an 18-year-old woman who wasn't in the FBI? And what had we tested during that study? I tried to focus, tried to bring that memory to the front of my brain, but it just made my entire skull throb with pain. Think, Rip, think, damn it! I couldn't think anymore. I needed to sleep, no matter how much I wanted to keep reading. I decided to forego the bedroom and just get comfortable on the couch. I was so tired I don't even remember taking my shoes off, but when I woke up hours later, they were on the floor, kicked off and left to land one perched on top of the other. I rubbed my eyes and slowly sat up. I glanced at my watch. 6:12 a.m. As the events of the day before came flooding back, I attempted to organize my thoughts, as well as all the information I had read but couldn't process the night before. I remembered one thing. Winkle Labs. I knew that's where I would start. I stretched my neck, cleared my throat, and stood to head for the shower when I noticed something about the coffee table. It was empty. I frantically looked around, but Freya's file was gone.
You're listening to Big World Network.